I am Ed Cherwinski, chair of the Atlantic Forest Research Collaborative Professional Development Working Group, and I'm pleased to be able to have Gaetan Pelletier here speak on sustaining our hardwood resource. Before we get to today's presentation, I want to encourage you to visit the Atlantic Forest Research Collaborative website to find out about all things related to forest research in the Atlantic region at afrc.ca. And go to the events page or the calendar of events. It is there that we'll be posting links to copies of these PowerPoints from our e-lecture series. Work is well underway for our winter e-lecture series, and we will send out notices shortly. Let me get this e-lecture rolling with an introduction. Gaetan is the executive director of the Northern Hardwood Research Institute from its beginning. He also spent numerous working years with J.D. Irving Limited, where he successfully held various positions as silviculture forester, district forester, district superintendent, and manager of our research and development and continuous improvement. Gaetan is a Lean Six Sigma trained and certified. Over the years, he developed leading edge practices and management strategies from planted stands to hardwood forests. Gaetan has a passion for developing management systems, promoting adaptive management, and designing precision forestry tools to transform knowledge into solutions for practitioners. Today, Gaetan will present some of the work Northern Hardwood Research Institute is conducting to improve knowledge in the area. He will showcase novel mobilization tools NHRI is producing to transform this knowledge into effective and practical solutions for the stakeholders in the forest products sector of New Brunswick. I encourage all of you to keep your video off and only turn on your audio when you're asking a question at the end of the presentation. So Gaetan, it's up to you. You will have about 40 minutes to present sustaining our hardwood resource, and we'll reserve about 15 minutes for a question period. As moderator, I will look for participants to raise your hand at the end, and we'll call on you to ask the question. All good? Great. I'll hand it over the reins to Gaetan, and it's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Ed, and thank you for the AFRC for the invite, and thank you for you folks to attend. So we want to talk about how we're tackling sustaining the sustainable management of our hardwood resource here at the NHRI. We're just a small private research center located in Edmundston, and we're a partnership between the forest sector players, so private industry, governments, and also University of Moncton. And we've been in existence since 2012. And our mandate is very, very simple. We're here to build tools so practitioners can manage the forest more sustainably, and we do it through applied research. Do you see my screen?
We do. It looks great.
Okay, so we're gonna get right in the middle of it. All right, so the outline today, I want to talk about the context around the management of our hardwood resource in New Brunswick. And I want to discuss 7 key silviculture concepts that we could grasp in order to inspire us to improve the way we manage this forest. I will introduce a framework on how to actually go about and do that, and I'll wrap up by giving some examples on how we actually do that. And it's important to understand the scope within which we're working here at the NHRI is well, northeastern North America, but we say wherever sugar maple grows well. That's really where we can operate, and our body of knowledge applies. But the other distinction is we are really focused on the production of traditional forest products. So all of our management that we introduce, all of our silviculture looks at in the working forest, trying to grow value through the production of forest products. There's a lot of real important other values out there, biodiversity and habitat and whatnot. But we don't pretend we know it all. So when we talk, remember it applies to growing timber, and all the other values are very important. But there's better, more knowledgeable people around that can talk about those topics. A lot of what we're going to be talking today is from New Brunswick. That's our estate that we're comfortable with. We know, but again, it does apply to other jurisdictions. Just a reminder: in New Brunswick, 85% of the land base is forested, and half of it is on provincial crown lands. About a third of it is managed or owned by small woodlot owners, and about 16% is owned by private large forest products companies. So that's the context that we're operating under. In New Brunswick, about half of the forested area is growing pure softwoods. The other half is a mixture of hardwood stands and mixed stands, and about 30% of the land base, of the forested land base in New Brunswick currently today, grows hardwoods, taller hardwoods. And we're talking about growing value, managing our forest for timber products. We're focusing on two key species, sugar maple and yellow birch. The other species are also important and they're also considered, but our focus is very, very tight on those two, these two main species. So we do have some challenges and some issues, and I'm listing three here today. The first one is at least on crown lands, but there's no indications it's not the same on the other type of tenures. The sustainable harvest levels are forecasted to decline as far as taller hardwood goes. And then this is an old slide from about 5 years ago, and DNR currently is redoing their management plan, so this will change. But for illustration purposes, let's go back 5 years ago when it was perceived that the annual allowable cut would drop by an order of about 11-12% starting now. But also the proportion of sugar maple is dropping dramatically, and with that is a drop in tree size. So fewer large trees into the near and long-term future. So that's the forecast. So quite an awakening, and it really sets the urgency of doing something now. So let's drill into this a little bit. Still under the problem, the first problem, we looked at 20 years of temporary plot data. So the old FDS plots. There's about 42,000 of them, and we split them into two cycles of New Brunswick forest inventory, and we did a comparison from 92 to 2002 against 2003 to 2012, and really what we found, and it is the reason why DNR was forecasting a drop in the annual allowable cut. Sugar maple has dropped by about 20%. Red maple has increased by about 60%, but there's also been an overall reduction in the growing stock. And we have to be careful how we interpret this, because these are not permanent plots that we go back to and we have successive remeasurements. These are variable and temporary plots under a lot of rigor. But it still draws a picture of what's happened between two 10-year cycles of forest inventory. So pretty bleak picture as far as we're concerned, but at least we know. And this is the picture in the commercial sized trees. So trees in these 10 centimeter diameter class and up. So trees greater than 7.1, or sorry, 9.1 centimeters at breast height. So these are the trees that are in place or were in place already into the mature or commercial classes. And then we're drilling down a bit more, and we're looking at what's happening to the species in terms of mean annual increment. And I'm just showing one study here that was published in the Canadian Journal of Forest Research, not our study, but it shows the same trends, where there's quite a few species that are increasing in growth rate if you express them as mean annual increments. Balsam fir, red maple, red spruce. But if you look at sugar maple, I don't see my cursor, but right here, the orange, sugar maple is plateauing. It is flattening in terms of mean annual increment, and at the detriment of other species that we could call interfering, that will take its niche and then benefit from that. Why? So are sugar maple trees getting older? And I'll talk about that later. Is there some type of climate stress that affects sugar maple more than other species? Is there a decline as a result of our harvesting activities? We're not exactly sure, but these are things we are looking at. As far as sugar maple, we know it is the Goldilocks of all the species, very, very sensitive to minute changes in environment and site and climate. Very sensitive to drought, very sensitive to freeze and thaw cycles in early winter. Significant weather events have a toll, and sugar maple is known to be victim, if you want, of cumulated stress. So one factor on top of the other, a couple dry summers, and then an ice storm the year after, and freeze thaw cycles. And it's one of the species that really is vulnerable to these accumulations of different stress. Oh, climate change, of course, everybody talks about that, and unfortunately, it is known, it is a fact that sugar maple will do less well, will do worse in the future as the negative impacts of a change in climate start to manifest themselves. And again, just be careful. These facts, if you want, they're all considered in a static environment. So we say if nothing changes, sugar maple will be affected the most. If we don't do something special, it is at risk. So it doesn't mean that sugar maple is doomed, but certainly the status quo, do nothing, does not favor sugar maple at all. And as you know, everybody wants sugar maple, from the high grade producers for flooring and bird's eye maple and figured wood and appearance wood, all the way down the chain to the low grade, if you want, type of products. For tissue, maple has very good characteristics, and it certainly makes good firewood. So it is our prime species as far as the hardwood species are concerned. So that's the first problem. What's happening to the trees already on site, in place? How are they making out? What's the dynamic around that? The second problem is, what about the new trees? What about what we're recruiting and what grows after we've done some actions to the forest, or even if we don't do any treatments? What's happening to the new cohort? Again, we looked at the FDS data, compared two 10-year cycles of inventory. Very, very bleak picture, and really more alarming than what's happening to the trees that are standing today. So sugar maple saplings over a 10-year or 20-year period are reducing in proportion. There you go. Red maple is taking its place. Beech is encroaching. Non-commercial species are also taking the spot that used to be taken by sugar maple. And about the only good news out there is that yellow birch is not doing too bad. So there might be a piece of the solution right there. Yellow birch could probably play a role in how we restore our forests. And the last problem I'm gonna bring up, and it's just the way we've categorized them, but this one is about we as humans, we as foresters and land managers, are we part of the situation? So we've looked at it and we understand very well the state of the forest management, and New Brunswick is in a pretty good spot. When we look at hardwoods, if we want to be critical, we say the strategies are simplistic. Some people may even say they're borrowed from the softwood playbook, and but the silviculture as we know it today of our hardwood stands is based on treatments. People talk about overstory removal as if it's a entity and it starts and ends there. Usually the strategies are at very, very high level, not technical and not operational. There's a lot of inconsistencies how the hardwood management strategies are elaborated. We lack a good silviculture framework. The stuff we learn in silviculture 101, the silviculture regimes and how do we drill down to different levels. And a lot of those strategies are vague and criteria are very scarce. We tend to ignore the operational aspect. Like you could conduct the best single tree selection treatment in the world, but you do it in the wrong season and you can ruin all the expected outcomes that you wanted to do. We don't talk about that in general in our province. We've had a much too high reliance on single tree selection in this province. We try to force it everywhere where the treatment, the regime, the silviculture system was not to be. We've had a poor focus on how to control density, competition, basal area, and the last thing, which is very important, we always say we want to grow quality, but nowhere is there any objective standard or set of criteria to address quality. So these are the challenges as we think exist out there. But I think by understanding very key concepts, we can make a change, and a lot of this is not new at all. A lot of this is we learned, but we just forgot. The first concept is trees of different species have different monetary values, and very often we hear about ecosystem management. We're going to do broad actions, and we'll grow some type of a vegetative community, and then that's going to be all right. Well, it's not all right, because if you grow beech versus sugar maple, very, very big difference in terms of value. And the top species, as we know, are yellow birch, sugar maple, red oak. We used to have white ash, but what's happening with the emerald ash borer, that is being downgraded. But those top species, the lumber is very valuable, a lot more than other species, but also the yield. They yield typically greater than 25% of the gross merchantable volume in saw logs and high grade products if you pay attention. All in all, a forest of yellow birch and sugar maple could be worth 10 times, 20 times the same forest that's composed of beech and poplar. Very, very important. The second concept is about tree size. And we haven't paid too much attention to that, but tree size has a big impact on value, and a big impact on what's the growth rate of that tree. And very consistently, we find the same conclusions everywhere of all those who have looked at it. Big trees lose vigor, they lose value. Their growth rates are substantially lower than that of smaller, and by small we mean younger trees. And what we found out is that for sugar maple and yellow birch, anytime you're beyond 45 centimeters of DBH, that tree does not pay its taxes anymore, and it's losing vigor, it's losing growth rate, and it's losing products. And if you don't go today and get that 45, 50 centimeter hardwood tree, sugar maple tree, and you only come back in 25 years, that tree will have a lot less value, and it might have lost the saw logs that it has today. So very, very important concept. And again, along the same lines, the growth rate. Very, very, very straightforward here. Trees bigger than 25, 30 centimeters are not growing as fast as trees that are smaller. And we looked at all the species with the folks at University of Maine, and very, very, very clear picture. And it conforms with all of those who have looked at this across northeastern North America. And even if you look at low residual basal area in green here versus high residual basal area, the trend is the same. You're on a downward trend as far as growth rate beyond 25, 30 centimeters. And if you leave a high density, the growth rate is a lot smaller than if you leave a density that reduces competition. Very important concept. Again, as far as sheer value, excuse me, we see typically that the saw log content as a proportion or as a nominal volume drops significantly beyond 45, 50 centimeters. So what does that mean? So it means if you're managing for value, if you're managing for timber products, think twice before leaving a big 60 centimeter sugar maple to cut a smaller one. There's big consequences, again, for wildlife, for habitat, for biodiversity. It may be justified, but if you're concerned about growing timber, you got to understand that. Third concept is competition impacts stand growth. That's a no-brainer, but very, very well documented that even across a size of diameters, we know the growth rate curve there, but depending on how much we open up that stand, we get significantly different mean annual increments. Very, very straightforward. Competition is a big thing, and we need to manage it, and I'll talk about this here in a second. So there's also an interaction between species. Each species has a different growth pattern, growth rate. We know the impact of tree size, diameter in terms of growth rate, and we know about competition, but there's also an interaction. And here we're looking at a single tree basal area growth, and here we're looking at sugar maple that we leave at very high basal areas, 30 square meters per hectare. There's a growth pattern across range of diameters. If we thin that stand down to by half, so down to 15 square meters per hectare, the growth rate on the single trees is much better. And then if we take it down even further, the growth rate on the individual trees at 5 square meters of basal area per hectare is much better. So a very clear relationship where there's an interaction between diameter, but also the density at which you leave your trees. And in red is the same three patterns, but for yellow birch, which is always grows faster than sugar maple. But again, the relationships between sugar maple and yellow birch are the same. So again, beyond 45 centimeters, you're into a declining growth rate situation. Now, some of you will say, okay, well, that's on single trees, but I mean, we need to be preoccupied about the hectare yield. Well, it's the same thing, and the same relationship that you see on single trees is true for basal area per hectare. And then there's tons of studies. This one is from Ontario, and here's the mean annual increment curve for basal area of a stand as a function of residual basal area post treatment. And there's a very narrow window there where you have the apex, and it's between 12 and 18 square meters per hectare of residual basal area. We have looked at it here too at the Institute. We cored hundreds of trees, and we just basically validated the exact same findings as the folks in Ontario and New England and Quebec have made. If you want to grow the most basal area per hectare per year, your stands have to be between 15 and between 18 square meters per hectare post-treatment. And the lower, the better. So we all remember, those of us who've been here for a while, that 18 square meters per hectare threshold was just religious, and we ended up cutting trails and cutting a few balsam fir trees just to leave that basal area, and we left big trees because they capture more basal area. So we did the absolute worst thing, and 18 is at the very, very upper end of the range of residual basal area as far as growing higher mean annual increments. The fourth concept is tree vigor. Now, the health of a tree affects, as you know, growth rates, and it interacts again with tree size, with diameter. But the same findings. The dark green line, sugar maple. The close dotted line is poor health sugar maple, and the slanted line is average health sugar maple. Again, same growth rate pattern across range of diameters, but it's all moderated by vigor of your tree. And then we have the exact same pattern for yellow birch, and it's just always higher. Yellow birch always has higher growth rates than sugar maple, but the patterns are the same. The fifth concept is residual basal area after treatment impacts not only stand growth, but also regeneration dynamics. And we did this big retrospective study here with John Kershaw and his graduate student at the very start of the Institute, and drilled a ton of trees and did the dendrochronology, and we looked at reconstructing the stand and what was the dynamics of saplings. And what we found out is as far as beech, when you have beech in your stand, and it doesn't have to be a high proportion, usually around 25-30% does it. The more you open up, the less beech saplings you will promote. But reverse that thinking and say the less you open up when you have beech, the more beech saplings you'll get. Beech is a champion of opportunities as far as small gap openings, and it will outperform any other species. Sugar maple has a funny pattern. So if you don't remove enough basal area as a percentage, not much will happen to sugar maple. There's a window in the middle where sugar maple likes openings, and again it tapers off, where if you open up too much, you're not going to end up with a lot of sugar maple saplings. Very interesting trend there, and it makes sense when you think of it. Yellow birch, well, we all know, if you want yellow birch and it's present in your area, open up a lot, and then you're going to have a lot of yellow birch. And red maple seems to be just happy to be red maple. It doesn't have a real strong pattern, and it will always do well, and often at the detriment of the other species. So what does that mean? Well, if you want to promote yellow birch mostly and discourage the other ones, but keep some sugar maple, a lot of the even age silviculture regimes will do it, where you almost remove, well, you actually remove all of your stand within 20 years, whether in one pass or two pass or three passes, depending on the subsystem that you use. If you want to promote beech and some sugar maple, but not much of the other species, well, practice gap silviculture, so uneven age management. But beware, if beech is there, you will just help beech do better. But in the middle, as far as characterizing treatment or prescription using percent basal area removal, in the middle, the 40% removal all the way up to the 75-80% removal, you can do a lot of good for sugar maple and control the interfering species to some degree. And it does make sense. We all know if you want to grow sugar maple by harvest-based silviculture, it better be already on the forest floor. It better be installed. And if you do openings, it will just thrive and come out of there. So it needs light. It is a very shade tolerant species, but not as much as American beech. Sixth concept, very important, and we see examples of it not being properly considered everywhere. Releasing the crowns of crop trees. So we're talking about basal area reduction and its benefits. But if we don't do it in a controlled manner, where while doing it we release the crown of crop trees, and then we're not gonna promote the growth on those crop trees as much as we could. And here, what we're seeing, the orange line is the trend from a moderate thinning or moderate removal, and the light blue line is the growth rate if we don't do anything on the same stand. But the purple is a moderate removal but patchy by nature, where it's not uniform. Some trees are released, but a lot of them are not. The overall growth rate for your hectare is somewhat lower. It's almost close to do nothing. So in some cases, not applying a treatment uniform so you can release the crown of crop trees. Sometimes you may say, gee, maybe I won't even do it. I'm not going to do anything. And the last concept is super important, and I kind of alluded to it early on, and I mentioned that you can pick the absolute best silviculture regime, and you can implement it textbook, like real good regulation of basal area, real good control of release of the crowns of crop trees, and so on and so forth. You tick all the boxes in your checklist, but you didn't consider the season, and you didn't consider the harvesting system and some of those very important operational treatments. Conducting a harvest-based treatment, which objective is to encourage the establishment of a new cohort, and you're targeting yellow birch, conducting that treatment under 4 feet of snow in March will not at all meet those objectives. So these are super important constraints concern, and I call them constraints, but they're not constraints. They're elements of your decision making. And the other example would be you have a single tree selection you want to conduct. and you target it in late summer when the bark is still tender, and you're going to do damage on roots and stems, and again fail to meet the objectives that you wanted to do. So very important concept. So now we're moving on to, okay, so what do we do? Like, these are all no-brainers. We all knew that. We all learned that. We learned nothing new in the first 30 minutes of this presentation. So we say, like, we need a framework within which to conduct our forest management, our harvest-based silviculture, and it has to be around silviculture systems. So stay away from just one treatment in 2020. Think timeline, think a sequence of different treatments at different timings that each achieve a different objective so that you can have great hardwood stands again. And a silviculture system and a regime that implements it usually serves three functions, and not always at the same time. You establish regeneration, you do tending on the young trees, and then you do harvesting for different objectives. And it's amazing, all of us as foresters, how often we go to the woods and we talk about what we see, and then it is very static in time. We talk about what we're going to do today, but very few people can articulate what's the plan for the whole regime. Example, shelter wood system, very common. Everybody talks about them. Everybody claim that they're implementing silviculture, shelter wood silviculture, but you're hard pressed to get an answer to say, okay, and then I'm doing the ceiling establishment cut this year. I'm coming back in 12 to 15 years before the regeneration is too high, and I'm going to take a top off. I'm going to do an overstory removal, and then I wait another 10, 12 years to consider if I do a PCT or not. You don't hear those discussions as much as we should. So every regime, and shelterwood is a good one. A shelterwood silviculture system is a deferred clear cut in many entries within 20 years to start a brand new stand, but you need more activities. So the concept of talking about silviculture regimes is very important, and we're not there yet. So again, this framework that we're looking at, there's many bricks that are ready to be put in the wall, and some of the walls are being built. And I always look at it as a pyramid of priorities for silviculture activities. But at the very base, we have to regenerate the desired species we want and reduce risk of losing value on crop trees that are there today. After we've secured that layer, then we can go on and do some improvements on crop trees and improve the quality and growth rate. And if we're really good at that, then we move on to the fancier intensive stand management. But the base of the pyramid is still today the immediate priority. And hardwood silviculture is complex. And we spend a lot of time in the woods with folks who actually do the work, and it is very it's a very big job to make it understood, and everybody thinks it's too complicated, and we got spoiled here doing the best softwood silviculture in North America. But the model is simple, and we got a bit lazy because of that. So everybody finds hardwood silviculture tougher and complex. The other element, and I'm almost done here. The other element is whatever we do, we need to embed it within a framework of adaptive management. Plan, do, check, act. Once we talk at the regime level, we talk that language. Then you can formulate hypotheses on what you want your forest to look like time X or time T plus 10, T plus 20. And so you've made your hypotheses, and then you can just check and then from your evaluation, you just fix the course if you're not on track. Very important that everything we do is embedded in that. And the province adopted results-based management, so that's a real good start. We just need to figure out all the elements to make it work. And the example I used before with the uniform shelter wood. Well, when do you evaluate your if your objectives are met mid-term, long-term? Well, it's when you have critical times to implement the next treatment. So just before you do your overstory removal, go and check, is my regen okay? And if yes, you can move on and remove the overstory. But if not, you gotta remediate or decide what you do, so on and so forth. So once you talk about silviculture systems and regimes, you have the jig to apply adaptive management. Very elaborate silviculture systems. I'm not gonna spend too much time there, but here's what we're telling people. Like we built this silviculture prescription system at the AFRC. We've been improving it since 2015. We think we have the right framework to decide what regime to pick and how to implement the treatments. What we're finding is that in 2/3 of the time, like we cruised about 5,000 hectares in New Brunswick in the last 3 years, and very intensive precision inventories. And every time we run the keys to decide what would we do there. We find that we have, in general, poor quality forests. And then what we want to do is to go there, cut the trees that will lose value and will not be there if we wait too long. We want to release a small pool size trees that are there and are of acceptable growing stock. We want to create some germination beds for new cohorts to install. We want to make sure we have full stocking of saplings in the near future. But here's what we found out is if we do this well, and usually it's going to be yellow birch that will get installed, very often after you do intermediate treatment in your saplings, a PCT or a commercial thinning, a new cohort gets installed. And we find in a lot of cases that new cohort is sugar maple. So there's a lot of hope there. So we think that's an interesting cycle, but how do you do that? Well, there comes the irregular silviculture system. Very different than even age, very different than uneven age, but it fits in that middle slot that we showed where sugar maple does so well, and yellow birch does well, and we find it could become the dominant system for New Brunswick in the short term, and we could always evolve towards uneven age down the road. We're talking about continuous cover irregular shelter woods, which tend to look like a single tree selection, but lower basal area, 14 to 16 square meters per hectare. You have a trail pattern a bit tighter where you encourage soil disturbance and promote regeneration. And then your re-entries are sparser apart, but gradually you can shift those stands more towards a real uneven age quality forest. So that's a very high level view of how we think we can improve our hardwood resource and sustain it, so we can grow quality products of the right species. And there's a ton of discussions that we'd be happy to have around that. We encourage you to visit our website. On it, you'll find a big section on our silviculture prescription system. You got all kinds of documentation. We have a mobile phone app that you just answer some questions in the woods. It will recommend a silviculture regime and describe how to implement the treatment. This afternoon or tomorrow morning, we're launching our new newsletter, the fall newsletter. In it will be new stuff, and in it will be a link to a documentary film that we made to explain what I just kind of talked about today here. So so that's it. That's what I wanted to present, and hopefully it planted some seeds, and it will generate more discussions and more requests down the road. And I really hope. Good. I hear it. I was wondering if
No, you're good.
I did that for nothing.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, man. You did a great job. Thank you very much for presenting today. I'm going to open at this time for questions. If anyone has any questions, please raise their hand, and either Gaetan or myself. Oh, I see Mike Hutchison already has a question. So Mike, go ahead.
Gaetan, now that you got your screen turned off, I was wondering if you might roll back to the last slide that you had up before you showed continuous cover regular shelterwood. It was the slide that had like the 7 steps of sort of rehabilitating a stand that was already in bad shape.
Whoops.
One more back,
right,
I think. Yeah.
Yep.
This one's pretty interesting. Just wondering if you could maybe speak to the success there, like that you guys have noticed. How long does it take to take, a degraded forest, apply this, more than usual opening up of the stand to get the new cohort and then transition over to a regular shelterwood? Is that something you can think about happening within like a 10 to 15 year period or much longer?
Yeah. So after you've done steps 1, 2, 3, which is conducting the harvest-based silviculture treatment, which releases pole-sized trees, keeps them, and then creates germination beds, and creates and maintains a basal area of at least 14 square meters per hectare. To get into this situation where you had patches created, you have dense saplings, we're just talking about 20 years. And actually, that picture on number 5 is just that. It's taken in a 20-year-old treatment. So it's over dense. You need some density management treatments. You can do it pre-commercially, or you can wait and do it with a harvester and get some pulpwood. But this stage here, this is so it's the same transition. This is like a 40-year post-treatment patch where you recruited yellow birch, and those trees are amazing. They're as big as planted white spruce of the same age. Like, these are 25 centimeter trees, and we've done a commercial thinning a little bit prior, so probably 15 years before that, so around age 35, I think. And it is the understory is full of quality, vigorous sugar maple seedlings. So to answer your question, like 40 years, you're all the way to here, and then you're just sailing. There's not much that can go wrong. You get a mixture of species and a ton of tools in your tool belt to get to uneven age if you want.
Thanks for that.
Any other questions?
Ed, this is Ted Needham. I had a question.
Oh, great, Ted. I don't see your hand. Go ahead. Yeah.
Terrific job, Gaetan. Thanks very much. I guess my question was around site quality and how the things you described might vary across site quality, because my sense is in New Brunswick, we have some, if you look across the whole Northeast, we have some pretty good sites, but not a lot of them. And we have a bunch of kind of marginal sites where sugar maple will grow and do okay. And then, a little bit lower quality sites where it exists, but seems to be really susceptible to more of those stresses you referred to. So can you will you just go through some thinking around site quality and how it impacts the things you were talking about?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, Ted. I'm glad you ask it, because I always forget to talk about that. And a lot of the silviculture decision trees or keys that have been built in the area build that in. You got a loop that asks you questions. Are you sure you're on a quality site, and then you want to invest extra resources? But we decided at the very beginning of the institute to keep it cleaner, and then we're almost ready here to show our high quality hardwood potential mapping tool, where using existing information about site environment and some dendro measurements and whatnot, and relationships built by Paul Arp and Chris Henniger and those guys, where you can map the potential of a site anywhere in New Brunswick at the 20 meter by 20 meter resolution, and then you can amalgamate to make some zones where there's potential to grow quality hardwoods and justify the extra investment. So what we recommend is do that first, and then when the answer is I have a site with high or very high potential to grow quality hardwood trees, then you go through our recommended regimes and treatments. But you're right. It's not everywhere that you want to do that. It's not because you have hardwoods on a site today that the site has great potential, and vice versa. It's not because a site is growing a white spruce plantation today that it cannot grow the best sugar maple in the world. So the mapping of the potential for us is a big size that happens upstream from our silviculture prescription system. And it is messy. It is, the relationships are not super strong, and sometimes they go against your intuition. And we've talked a lot to folks like Lee Allen and Paul Arp and Chris Henniger and Shane Furs, and it is a very tough science. You can ask a couple of our folks here at the institute that are trying to do it. It's a big job. So very, very, very important. We chose to do it before we start to think about silviculture.
Okay. Any other question?
Yes, I have a question.
Great. Go ahead.
It's Ted Wilson here in the United Kingdom. Thanks, Gaetan. That was a fascinating session, and it's actually surprising how similar the issues are to what we're dealing with broadleaf woodlands in our part of the world, although we're dealing with different species. I was interested in what constitutes a quality tree, and whether this idea of crop crown release works against the quality. What's the tipping point between ensuring a high quality stem but also maintaining the production or the increment on that quality stem? How do you go through that selection process, and what are the criteria for a quality tree that's going to be released within these crown release systems?
Yeah, it's very tough, and we're not quite there yet. But you folks are ahead of us a bit, and I've looked a lot into your concept of irregular forest and la futaie irrégulière in France, and I think and that's really where we got some of the ideas for our irregular silviculture. But in a nutshell, what it will look like is you have to decide. You have to leave a bit of shade, and you know about that more than we do. But we call them here training trees. That are not competitors. That are shorter than the elite trees, which tend to be co-dominants. We got to keep some, so we can prevent branchiness to get worse. But it's a balancing act, and frankly, where we are here in New Brunswick with our the maturity of our silviculture know-how, I don't think we're quite ready to go down to that level of finesse. It is very important, but here the base of the pyramid is not even taken care of. So what we often say is, listen, if you have a way to give instructions to your operators to do that, great, because in New Brunswick we don't mark trees. If not, it's better to grow a branchy yellow birch than to grow a perfect stem American beech. So we're making that trade-off, but we're not there yet as far as mastering that important element of the recipe.
Thank you. Very interesting. Actually, I don't know if there's such a big difference the way you describe it. One of our main focuses is actually continuous cover in conifer stands and spruce stands. And if I substituted spruce for sugar maple in your discussion, it would be the same. Same thing. Tree marking is a new skill, and training trees and all this sort of stuff. But that's why I'm interested in how you come around with criteria for that. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, we should talk. I think we can learn from you. Yeah.
Come to Ireland or Scotland or wherever.
Yeah, after the vaccine.
Yeah. Oh yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Final question. Anyone? All right. If not, then I want to say that I want to thank Gaetan for this wonderful presentation on putting knowledge into practice in this inherently complex system of sustaining our hardwood resource. The world has made us separated because of COVID currently, but we are inherently small. Thank you, Ted, for chiming in from across the Atlantic. It's great that the world can be this small too. So should anyone have additional questions that they want to ask Gaetan at a later date, I expect they could follow up with you, Gaetan, by email.
Yeah, very happy to do so. Don't be shy.
All right, very good. And with that, just keep your eyes peeled on the AFRC website, and we will have a winner series coming up, coming out shortly, I expect. So everyone, bye for now, and thank you very much for attending.
Bye, everybody. Season's greetings.
Bye now.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.